for that which is called the weaker vessel. I feel better. But that's a fact. Keep it watching. And so now in verse 28, he placed her on the donkey. There is no answer. She is dead. And so what happens now? We go from a lack of propriety to a fear in society to perverse morality that is acceptable until finally we have murder. The book of Leviticus says murder pollutes the land. Let me tell you just a little bit about murder. Not simply that God forbids it, the Ten Commandments. Not simply that God demanded capital punishment in Genesis 9. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, because that man is the image and glory of God. In the Old Testament sacrifices, there is no sacrifice for murder. If you murdered somebody, you can't offer a sacrifice. If you accidentally killed somebody, there are 6 Levitical cities you can flee to. But if you're a murderer, they won't receive you. They kick you out and you die. As a matter of fact, God said in Exodus, if you're a murderer, you can't even hold on to the horns of the altar in the tabernacle. They'll drag you out from there. There is no sanctuary to the murderer. Murder pollutes the land. As a matter of fact, the book of, I think it's Deuteronomy. It states that if there is a man who is found who is dead, or a woman who is found dead, the nearest city had to send out its elders, kill an animal, and offer it up as a sacrifice to purge that city of the possibility of its sin. A city was responsible for the singular individual who died. God hates murder. The book of Revelation says the tribulation period comes in part because of their murders and their idolatries and their fornication. God loathes murder. I am told that in our country, at present, there are 250,000 first-degree murderers that walk the street. Amazing. So now we have murder in the land. Are you with me? You see what happens to a society that rejects the notion of God and replaces it with nature? People die. People get raped. Good guys become in the minority. You're afraid to stay outside in the city. There is no sense of decorum. This is bad. It gets worse and worse. So what do? Watch this. In verse 29, this Levite goes home, and he entered his house, and he took a knife, and he laid hold of his concubine, and he cut her in 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout the territory of Israel. And it came about that all who saw it said, nothing like this has ever happened or been seen from the day when the sons of Israel came from the land of Egypt to this day. That Levite said that we cannot sit in ignorance of what is happening in our country. We have all got to get shocked. And the reason he does that is because in Israel, if you touched a dead body, you are now have to go through a ceremony of cleansing that took the better part of a day. Those packages arrived in every tribe, and you had to smell them, you had to touch them, you had to see them, the leaders did, and the word went out. A group of city has been taken over by perverts, and they have murdered and raped a woman and killed her. It's interesting. If you don't have at the front end a knowledge of God to prohibit evil, then you will be educated by the evening news. Is that right? You can learn it in church, or you can learn it on CNN. You can get it a posteriori or a priori of what rightness is. And so this Levite says, our nation needs to wake up, and I'm not going to let anybody have their head in the sand. We're in a bad way in our country. You know what he tells them to do? In verse 30, 3 words. Number 1, he says, you better consider it. You better gossip. You better talk. And get your head out of the sand as to what is happening out there. It's a bad deal. Do you parents know that at both of our high schools, we have policemen on staff? Did you know that? How many of you went to a high school that had a policeman on staff who were over 50 years of age to put out problems in the high school? Both of our high schools have cops that are there to deal with them. That is a fact. You adults in here, do you know who Marilyn Manson is? You know what they're listening to? We're in a bad way. A number of weeks ago at the Crisis Pregnancy Center, they had a banquet. Some of you were there. They had a fellow get up and speak for 20 minutes. He was from New York, and he was an abortionist. And he had done 300 of them. And he stood up and he spoke, and he said, let me tell you what an abortion is. And he was very polite. He said, you must reach in and locate that fetus. And he says, you know what it feels like. It's a person. And you have to take a claw and hook it up and pull it out. And he said, the baby doesn't come out intact. It comes out in pieces. And you pull off arms, and you pull off legs, and then you can feel the intestines and you move them out. And he said, you can't leave a necrotic part in that woman or she'll be poisoned. You have to take an inventory. And so you assemble body parts on the edge of that gurney. And then he said, you can feel the head as to how big it is. And you pull it, and the cranial sections have not yet fused, and you can feel it give way, and it is a creamy substance. And you have to take out every part of that child. He said, I did 300 of them. And do you know what? That room got as quiet as this room is now. It was like he was saying, this is what's going on every single hour in this country. So this Levite says, you better take stock of where we are. To which you want to say to the Levite, yeah, Levite, where were you when we were embracing idolatry? That's where it started, but this is where it ends. And then he says, take counsel. That means the good guys better get together and talk it up. And then he says, you better speak up. Somebody better take a stand and start volleying back into the enemy's court, because our country is going to hell. Have I got something to preach on right now? I bet you I do. Can I tell you something? The wickedness of our country is so great that what you're seeing in abortion, immorality, perversion, and the like are only the advanced troops. That's all it is. The nerve center is in the thinking of man that has replaced the God who is there with the animation of nature and has made man God. That's the queen bee. In a sense, your job as a Christian and my job as a Christian in this culture is harder than Luther's in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, you had errors, but the basic assumption was that there was a God who had spoken in the Bible. They were just not quite sure what the book said that they went to. You and I don't have that privilege. We are into what are called, and by Paul, the schemes of the devil. You can stop the advanced troops and slow them down, but you've got to get to a culture's mind, and that is gone. The only way it's going to happen is by prayer of sicking God on a culture. Consider it, take counsel, and speak up. In the time remaining, we want to have communion. You could keep your seat and bow in prayer, and for these last moments, let's prepare our hearts. Our Father and our God, we did not ask to be born in this day, but we are. And we are those who are called, like the Levites, to be in fellowship with you and to be stewards and custodians of the mysteries of God and to be faithful to you. To be faithful to you both in truth and in life, in theology and in morality. And alas, God, we have committed the sin of Pergamum. We have committed the sin of Thyatira. And we have some amongst us throughout Christendom that hold to the teaching of Balaam, to teach men to eat things sacrificed to idols and honor other gods, and to fall into immorality and fornication. And we have allowed it. And our country has no longer a standard of right, and we have slid into the sewer of animism and of the exaltation of nature.